All right, UFC 243. The only fight that I honestly watched this card for, and I didn't even watch the full card. I started watching at Ally Quinta, which was cool to see him fight. I always root for him. He's out of Sarah's camp and Longo out in Long Island here in New York. Chris Weidman, like he's part of like that group of folks. So I always root for him. He lost in a decision, and it wasn't like controversial or anything. He like definitely clearly lost to Dan Hooker. But now the fight that I was really anticipating and looking forward to is the Israel Adesanya, aka Stylebender, versus Robert Whittaker fight. Now, Israel Adesanya was the interim champ. Robert Whittaker was the champ. Or not champ, just champ. But he has been hurt for some time. He pulled out of his last fight, and I think it was like 18 months or a year and a half or something like that since his last fight. And before that, he had a fight, and then before that, I think he had to pull out because of something else. Like, he was like one of these dope fighters that's a champion, obviously, but that is not too active due to injuries. And he's kind of like this stoic, no nonsense like type of dude. You know, he's not too much like into like the hype and the talking shit and stuff like that. Whereas Israel Adesanya, Stylebender, is actually like really good on the mic and like talking himself up and promoting a fight. And he's backed it up thus far. He's 18-0, completely undefeated, and has in his last fight with Kelvin Gastelum was one of the like most epic, definitely going to be in like top 10s, maybe even top 5 like fights of all time. Like epic battle, back and forth war with Kevin Gastelum. Robert Whittaker was kind of like a bigger version of Kevin Gastelum, like stylistically. At least I felt like, you know, watching the fight. I thought Israel had his work cut out for him, but he, like on some Anderson Silva, John Jones type of shit, like completely dismantled Robert Whittaker and knocked him out in the second round. And looked like he would have been able to in the first round if Robert didn't get like saved by the bell at the end. Like if Israel had like, I'll say another like 10 seconds, he probably could have finished it in the first. But he finished it promptly in the second round. But he's definitely the truth, yo. I cannot wait, and I hope the MMA gods listen to me, and I'm sure every other MMA fan, when we say that we want to see Israel Adesanya versus John Jones. We want to see it happen when both of them are undefeated. Technically, John Jones is not undefeated. He has one loss in his record, but it's like a bullshit disqualification from a quote illegal elbow that went from like 12-6 on an opponent years ago. And he was like completely dominating that dude before he got disqualified. And it's a rule that most say shouldn't be a rule, but it is. So technically he does have that one loss on his record, but he's widely regarded as being undefeated as well. But now John Jones is a light heavyweight, and Israel is a middleweight. Middleweight is 185 pounds, and light heavy is 205 pounds. Now, John Jones is widely regarded as the GOAT, and Israel is like an up-and-coming, could be like legend in the making, like kind of guy. Israel has said himself that, you know, John Jones, because John Jones called him out. Two things with that. One, Israel has said that that's John Jones' way of like trying to fight him now while he's like, you know, early in the UFC, and, you know, to try to like take him out the way like Mayweather fought Canelo before Canelo became Canelo, just to say that he has a win over Canelo. So he says that John Jones is trying to do that type of thing with him, like calling him out early on. Israel's saying that he'll definitely fight him, but he's not going to go up to 205 and fight him now because, you know, he wants to continue doing the work within his division in 185. But then that afterwards, once he defends his belt a few more times, he's definitely down to fight John Jones. And he predicts that that'll happen in 2021. So not next year, but the year after that, which would be fucking epic. Now, the second thing is most people, even including myself, when I heard that, like, John Jones was talking shit to him, and Stylebender was talking shit back, we were kind of like, they're two completely different weight classes, like 185 to 205. Why even entertain that? Which is also something that Brendan Schaub said multiple times, until Schaub had Israel Adesanya on his Food Truck Diary show, which you guys should check out, by the way, on YouTube. I'll link to it actually in the episode notes. Brendan Schaub used to fight as a heavyweight. Israel Adesanya was like bigger than him, and Schaub took it back then, and he said on air saying, I thought you fighting Jones would be like a pipe dream, like type of thing, but seeing you in person, you're fucking a big dude. And Israel like agreed, and told him about the whole thing of his plans to fighting Jones in 2021. But yeah, that would be such a dope epic fight, man, and I definitely hope it happens. That's all I got on UFC 243. Now, UFC 244 was definitely much more of a stacked card, I felt. And it was headlined by George Masvidal and Nate Diaz for the BMF belt. The bad motherfucker belt. Before we get there, one of the first notable fights was Kevin Lee's. And it's Kevin Lee's first fight in the UFC, not in the UFC, but first fight under head coach Firas Zahabi, which is like one of the the best coaches in MMA. He coached, for example, George St. Pierre, which is widely regarded as one of the best welterweights of all time. What's dope is that Kevin Lee got the advice from Joe Rogan when he went on Rogan's podcast that Kevin Lee should train with somebody like Firas Zahabi, because he has a similar fighting style to George St. Pierre, a good striker, wrestling background, and very athletic. And I think Kevin Lee before then was like, I don't know if he was like bouncing between gyms and just didn't really have like a head coach, head trainer. Rogan pitched that idea, apparently got those guys together. Kevin Lee took his advice and looked fucking spectacular. He knocked out Gregor Gillespie in the first round and won the performance of the night bonus. Then you have a fight between Derek Lewis, the Black Beast, versus Balgoy Ivanov. This Russian dude has like a crazy scar like on his chest because he literally got stabbed in the heart and didn't die. But yeah, that's just an interesting aside. As far as the actual fight, I thought he had Derek Lewis in like some sort of like jiu-jitsu hold, like a darce maybe, and it looked like Derek Lewis's like arm was just gonna like rip off, so it was pretty sick. And Derek Lewis got the W there. Then what else? Another notable fight was my man Corey Johnson, who fucking ran through Johnny Walker and knocked him the fuck out. Johnny Walker, which after his last fight, even though like a dick, he like threw himself on the floor to like kind of like do the worm or some shit, and then wound up like dislocating his shoulder and had to get like shoulder surgery and stuff like that. But prior to this performance, they were saying like maybe this is the guy that could beat John Jones, but Corey Johnson put the kibosh and all that. And Corey Johnson is a fighter that is, I also believe, underrated. Like, he'll let everybody and their mother know, but I kind of don't like the constant him saying that he's overrated and not getting a fair shake, and that he's gonna leave the UFC if he doesn't get a title shot, like that type of shit. I'm not like big on. I could definitely do without, but he's absolutely a hell of a fighter, super hard worker, and deserves a title shot. So the fact that he does say shit like that, kind of like can't knock him for it either. You know what I mean? Because like he has a point, but it's like, yeah, you have a point, but come on, don't whine. But again, at the same time, yeah, you have the right to fucking whine and complain, and the squeaky tire gets the oil type shit. Then you have Wonder Boy Stephen Thompson versus Vicente Luque, and that was actually fight of the night. It won that performance bonus, and Wonder Boy looked awesome. He looked like the Wonder Boy of old. I'm throwing up air quotes as I say old, because it's like, by that in the MMA world, I mean like 3 or 4 fights ago. You know what I mean? It's not like 5 years ago or some shit. But he was like super on point, like with that point karate fighting type style, like in and out. sidekicks galore, awesome footwork, like the whole 9 yards. And he wound up like just picking off his opponent like masterfully. And it's good on him because his previous fight he had a loss to Pettis, and his 2 fights before then he lost to Tyron Woodley twice, so he could definitely use the W. And I'm glad he got it. He's definitely somebody that I enjoy watching fight. Then you have Kevin Gastelum and Darren Till that I was really looking forward to, especially after Kevin Gastelum's previous fight was, like I mentioned earlier, the epic war battle between him and Israel Adesanya. And then Darren Till's last fight was him getting knocked out by either George Masvidal or Anthony Pettis. One of the two. But those 2 fights were like back to back. So if his last fight was George Masvidal, then the one before that was Pettis. If not, it was Pettis, and then the one before that, Masvidal. But either way, it was like, I thought this was going to be like fight of the night. Like this was going to be a dope fight. And it wound up being a complete dud. And my least favorite fight of the night. And it was the co-main event. But then that brings us to the bad motherfucker belt being on the line for George Masvidal versus Nate Diaz. This was just like an epic, iconic UFC event in and of itself because of this BMF belt. Now, for those of you that don't know, Nate Diaz, during his last fight, after winning, he was on the mic with, I believe, Rogan, and he calls out George Masvidal, and he says to George Masvidal that there's no real gangsters left in the UFC besides them two, and he respects them because he's also a gangster, but he's not a West Coast gangster. And he challenged him to fight for the bad motherfucker title, to see who's the real bad motherfucker in the UFC. And the UFC wound up like parlaying that into literally creating an actual belt, like a championship belt that's like black and it says BMF on it for bad motherfucker. And they marketed and promoted like the shit out of this fight with using that theme, which is dope that it came from like Nate Diaz, who historically has been, him and his brother Nick Diaz have been kind of like the redhead stepchild of the UFC until Nate like beat Conor McGregor in that upset and kind of like forced the UFC to like pay more attention to him kind of. Then he like says this shit on the mic and manifests this whole like bad motherfucker thing, which is really cool. And like you had The Rock, Dwayne Johnson, be the one that like in the press conference announced like the creation of the belt. He was the one that's gonna like put the belt on whoever the winner was, etc., etc. This was like this big like hype machine thing behind it. Unfortunately, though, sadly, the fight got called off by the doctor after the second round, so in the beginning of the third round, because Nate Diaz had a very deep cut on his right eye, above his right eye. And those of you that know Nate Diaz know that he has like so much scar tissue on his face from just like being in brawls that like he starts bleeding right away in the first round no matter what. They say that if the fight was taking place in Vegas, they would have like let the fight go. But since it took place in New York and the New York commission is a bit like stricter, they decided to call it off. And at first I was upset. Obviously nobody wants like, you want to see like the actual outcome of the fight. And even though George Masvidal was clearly winning, like the first 2 rounds, I would say, at that point, like Nate Diaz is somebody that outlasts his opponents and like never gets gassed. And he starts like picking it up like in the third round. So yeah, the third, the fourth, the fifth round to look forward to seeing that. But unfortunately, we were not able to. But after seeing the Dana White, the president of the UFC, posted some photos of Nate Diaz's cut afterwards, and he wound up getting a shitload of stitches. Like I want to say, like from memory, maybe like 20, 25, 30 stitches or some shit like that. Like it was a lot worse than I thought it was when I was originally watching the fight. So it probably was the right call. But yeah, it's sad not to have seen that epic fight, play out completely. And interesting now, Nick Diaz, which is Nate Diaz's brother, on Ariel Helwani's show, called out George Masvidal. Because Masvidal supposedly said some shit about Nate Diaz, and Nick, being like Nate Diaz's older brother, like took offense to it and said that, he'll fight him, he'll fuck him up. And I don't know if that'll ever happen. Would be interesting though, because Nick Diaz hasn't fought in a long time, and he was actually the I don't want to say the better fighter of the two, but like Nate Diaz was always in Nick Diaz's like shadow, because Nick Diaz was kind of like the star of the two brothers, until Nate started blowing up after like the Conor fights and stuff like that. But yeah, that's what I got for you folks for UFC 244.